right, cool. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Everybody enjoyed the party last night? Yeah? A rough morning? Appreciate you guys sticking in there all the way to the end. So this is Intro to Mobile Device Testing. Who in here has ever done any mobile device testing, pen testing, iOS, Android? Cool. Awesome. So my name is Damian Profancik. I'm a senior security consultant with NCC Group. This is my contact details if you'd like to get a hold of me. So we're just going to cover some of the basics. This is not like a real deep dive. It's mostly like covering, because mobile testing, there's so many facets and different things. It's mostly going to be about like just a high level tools, techniques, what we're looking for, and like what's the attack surface like. So I'm mainly going to focus, I have Windows Phone up here, but I'm mainly going to just talk about iOS and Android. I don't see a whole lot of Windows stuff in my assessments, but I do a lot of iOS and Android testing. So, and so basically, I'm doing, when I first started pen testing, I didn't do as much mobile, but it's like gotten to be a lot more market share what I'm doing nowadays. It's just because it's gotten so ubiquitous. Everyone's carrying a mobile phone that's a smartphone, and the problem is like it does so many things for us. It's really critical. It's got usually corporate secrets or some sort of personal secret data, banking details or something. And then another aspect of it, a lot of times it's also like our two-factor authentication. Like if we've got to get into like our office network or something, or like I have two-factor auth on my Google, Gmail, Twitter, Facebook, all these things, and they all use my mobile phone, whether it's sending a text message or some sort of authenticator app, or an RSA token, soft token, or something like that. So, making sure that the mobile platform is secure is really critical in that aspect, because that's the last line of defense for authentication a lot of times. So, what also makes the mobile devices unique is that there is a vast attack surface. There's lots of different things to look at. If we're doing like a web pen test, then it's mainly just looking at the inputs and outputs of the web application and how to manipulate that. But that's just one piece of doing a mobile test. It's really about the web APIs and servers that the device is talking to. How is the network traffic being transmitted over the wire? Is it secure? What kind of data gets stored on the device? Whether that's in log files or whether it's in the memory of the device or stored securely in configuration files and that sort of thing. And then there's direct attacks on the application itself. So you can manipulate the application. There's some standard web type attacks that you can actually do on the application as well. And then there's the source code itself. So like, we'll talk about a little bit more later, but like Android, you can decompile usually to source and look for things like, passwords and things like that in the source code itself. But when someone's thinking about doing a test on a mobile device, a lot of times the hardest thing is just going like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know where to get started. It's like a little black box, and how do I, start attacking that? Well, the first step is going to be any mobile device that I'm testing, Android or iOS, I'm going to want to jailbreak it or root it. You can do a test on a non-jailbroken or rooted device. It's just you're not going to be able to get some of the things, accessing the attack surface and things like that, and get down to some of the nice things on the device. So jailbreaking or rooting is really the first step in that, and that's because it breaks the application sandbox. So you can read files that you normally wouldn't be able to read memory that you normally wouldn't be able to read, and that sort of thing. So as I said, accessing the file system, you can pull files off that you may not be able to if it's not. A lot of times a way to get on the device and run commands and manipulate things is I usually install SSH. That's also how I usually pull files off. So you're going to need to jailbreak or root it to do that as well. Also allows you to put in debug mode, which is nice for, I'll talk about that a little bit later, doing application debugging, especially for iOS if you want to, where you can't just decompile the application if you need to actually step through the application, debug it, and that sort of thing. And then lastly, it also disables a lot of, or you're able to disable a lot of protections. One challenge that apps will put in is SSL pinning, certificate pinning. We'll talk about that a little bit deeper in a second. And then also, it may detect whether the device is jailbroken or rooted and either bail out of the app or something like that, so you may need to bypass that. To bypass the detection, there's a couple nice tools. On iOS, my favorite is TS Protector P. I first used Xcon. Xcon, I think, is pretty much kind of gone by the wayside, though. It may work on, I'm not sure it's still maintained, though. But TS Protector P, I had DirecTV, and for some reason DirecTV thought it was a great idea to not run their app if it was jailbroken, and I don't see why that would matter, but that was the only way I could run DirecTV. TS Protector P basically creates its own sandbox around the applications. You can choose which application you want to sandbox, and then it fools the app into thinking, when it tries to go read a file and things like that would normally tip it off that the device is jailbroken, it will report back, no, everything's good, we're all good. And then for Android, there's RootCloak is a good choice to do that as well. From a network perspective, who's done web pen testing? Any web pen testers? Okay. So Burp Suite's my favorite proxy. I live in that 99% of the time. You could use OWASP Zap, or if you're a Windows guy, you could use Fiddler. But from a web perspective, it's really just like doing a web test. You're going to want to intercept the traffic. You're going to want to profile all the APIs that it's calling, look at all the inputs, and start attacking those. There's a couple key steps, though, that are different from a web application that you'll have to do in order to intercept that traffic, though. One step, so again, I like Burp Suite, so all my references are Burp Suite references, but one important thing is, by default, Burp Suite's going to listen on the local host only. You want to switch that to all interfaces so that you can listen on the same wireless network as your mobile device. The next step is you're going to also want to install the CA cert on the device, because apps are you going to profile the SSL and check it when it tries to launch, and it's not going to work usually if you don't have the certificate on the device. So in Burp Suite, you can go to the page, you can download the certificate, and then you want to then install the certificate on the device. And once you have that, then it's a trusted CA on the device, and then you can start intercepting traffic. The next step that's going to be the challenge is in how do you get the traffic to Burp? And there's several different ways or methods. Some apps are more finicky than others, and so you might have to try a couple different methods. So the easiest way is just in your Wi-Fi settings. You can go in, just set up your proxy, and redirect to your box that's running Burp or whatever your proxy of choice is. This works most of the time, and this is the easiest way. If this doesn't work, there's another method. And Android, I think you have to install some extra stuff to try to do this, but on iOS, you can just set up a VPN server on your laptop. Like on my Mac, I use VPN Activator. It just sets up a little PPTP server, and then in that, like for example, on iOS, when you just set up a VPN on your phone. You can also set proxy settings inside that. So then everything that just forces everything over the tunnel for the VPN. I've had to fall back to this a couple times. There is one other method that's, I've never actually had to use it on a mobile device. I usually only use it when I'm testing like a thick client application, and that would be, you'd find out what APIs, what the host that your application is going out to, what the IP address and what the host name is, and then you can set up in your like hosts, etc hosts file on your laptop that's running burp, you would put, say that's going to localhost. So when it resolves that, it goes to localhost. Then in burp proxy, I apologize I don't have slides because this is a little complicated, but I've never really had to use this. But in burp proxy, this one here, under request handling, you can switch that to what's called transparent proxy, and then you can also then put in the host name where it's going to go, and then point that out to the real IP address. So when it resolves, then it's all transparent. But I've only had to do this with thick client applications, never mobile. So you probably won't ever run into that. So certificate pinning is the next challenge that you'll have to get past when you're doing a test. So it's great, you've installed your certificate, it's a trusted CA, but a lot of apps that's becoming more popular are going to actually pin to the server that it's coming from. So even though burp is auto-generating certificates that should be trusted, essentially what the pinning is doing is saying, I know my real cert, and here's the thumbprint of my real cert, or the hash, and that's going to be hard-coded in the application. And what it's going to do is when it goes to try to make a connection to the server it's supposed to be talking to, it's going to compare those two, the hash that's hard-coded and the hash of the cert that it got, and if those don't match, then it's going to bail out. And of course, burp's not going to match the certificate that burp's generating. It's not going to match that hash. But what we can do, now that we've jailbroken or rooted the device, we can install software that basically hooks the device, those APIs that call out and check any SSL settings, and completely just, this is not the SSL server you're looking for, and basically just says everything's okay, just kind of like with the jailbreak and root detection. So on iOS, my favorite is SSL Kill Switch, which is actually written by ISEC Partners, NCC Group subsidiary. Snoop-it also, we'll talk about Snoop-it a little bit more here in a minute, but it also has the ability to bypass certificate pinning. And then on Android SSL Trust Killer, also an application that we wrote. It's helpful for that. So, as I mentioned, doing the network side of things or the web API side of things for the mobile device is pretty much the same as if you were doing pen tests for a website. You're going to be looking for that WASP top 10 type stuff, SQL injection, cross-site scripting type things. You're going to look at like session management. How are the APIs handling sessions? What kind of tokens are API tokens or cookies, or how is it doing the session management? Is it doing that the right way? What are the authentication authorization mechanisms like? And then looking also for logic flaws, just like you were doing a web pen test. And then also information leaks, like are there details being submitted in the URL, and that sort of thing. Things being transmitted without SSL over plain text, and that deal. And so then higher up on that is the network traffic, analyzing how is data going to and from the server over the APIs. As I mentioned, sensitive information in the URL. I was doing a mobile pen test a couple years back for a large bank in the Middle East, and the very first thing I noticed as soon as I got proxying up and running was that they sent the username and unsalted MD5 hash of the password in the URL. And I think it was over HTTP too. So neither of those are good. And not what you want to see in your banking application. So also, are things transmitted over HTTP? And then, like looking at the SSL TLS layer, is it you still using any version of SSL? Does it have invalid certificates? Does it, and the invalid certificate is also a sign that the application's not doing proper certificate validation. The developers disabled it, which is also a risk. Weak ciphers, anything to RC4 and low cipher strength, that sort of thing. Insecure renegotiation on SSL TLS. So that's the sort of stuff you're looking at for there. And then log files. This is also an interesting one. I've seen if sensitive information is being logged, like credentials, session tokens, crypto keys, that sort of thing. This is a great way to be able to pull those off, and that would be a finding. Several different applications that I use here. So that would be on the logs on the device. You're looking at configuration files. You're going to look at SQLite databases,plists for the configuration files on iOS, XML files for the configuration on Android. Looking at the keychain in iOS is also a really good place, whether they're storing things correctly on the keychain or if they're using the keychain at all. You can dump that. I generally recommend that data be encrypted and then put on the keychain and not rely on the keychain itself to be the encryption, because then you're relying on the user's passcode, or if they even have a passcode, then it wouldn't be encrypted anyways. Snoop-it, and I got some screenshots here in a second, is a great tool we'll talk about. Introspy, also a great one, very similar to Snoop-it. We'll talk about that a little bit deeper as well. So one of my favorite tools for iOS is iFunbox. So this is a great tool. You don't actually have to have a jailbroken phone to use this. You can use it with the non-jailbroken. There's some limitations on the sandboxing. You can copy files off, but if it's not jailbroken, as of iOS 8 point something, you can't actually write files back to it. So jailbroken, you can remove all those limitations, and you can read and write files back and forth. So it's a great tool. I usually use that for pulling files off of iOS devices. Snoop-it is an awesome tool. You essentially install it on the iOS device itself. You tell it what apps to monitor, and then on your machine, you just browse to the IP address of the device, port 12345, and then you can look at things like it'll log any file system access, it'll log any keychain accesses, and APIs that it's calling, any network calls that it's making, crypto type stuff. So this is a really great tool. I actually use this for a non-pen test function. My previous job, I had forgotten, I needed to know my password at my previous job, and I couldn't remember what it was, and we used Link for that, and so Link saved my password. And so I was able to actually use this tool to pull it up, go to keychain, and it showed me oh, here's your password. Oh, sweet. So that was helpful. Another tool that ISEC and NCC Group wrote is Introspy. There's a version for iOS and Android. It does a lot of the similar functionality that that Snoop-it does. It does have there's an Introspy analyzer that will go and then also make it a little bit more consumable, automate some of the things, and show you reports and things like that of dangerous things. But it'll show you things like file system access, dangerous APIs that it might be using, keychain stuff, logging to the console, that sort of thing. So that's a good one as well. And then on iOS, the easiest way to get logs and look at the debug logs is going to be using Xcode. It's a free tool from Apple, but it'll show you down here scrolling as you're using the tools, or just your phone's just sitting there. There's stuff doing things all the time, but you can then pick out Like it'll tell you which app is doing whatever, and you can pick out and look for things like, is it writing credentials out to log files? Is it, because app developers usually have that turned on in debug mode, but shouldn't be spitting those things out in a production app that's not in developer mode or debug. And so that would be a finding as well. On Android Studio has an Android monitor tool that can also show you the logs as they spit out and show you, you can kind of look for things that would be fishy there as well. On iOS for device memory, as I mentioned, iOS apps, you can't just decompile them and reverse them, so you have to turn to more traditional reversing, debugging type things. And so GDB, which is the popular debugger, is good and useful for that. So that's another reason why you'd need to have your device jailbroken, because you wouldn't be able to do that without that. ADB is usually what I use if I'm on Android, but GDB works as well on Android. And then there's some other neat things also in Android Studio, as I mentioned, where you can dump the heap and like get memory captures, and you can then scan through memory for things that you would need to access there. So, you know, when we're looking for data on the device, whether that's log files or in configuration files and things like that, what we're looking for is things like credentials, encryption keys, session tokens, PII that's unencrypted, and maybe like a SQLite database. I was testing another app where for some reason, it would go and download the entire customer database, not just for your store. It was a little payment app, but the whole entire customer database, all that PII. So it had everyone's address, name, email address in a SQLite, unencrypted SQLite database on the device. So that wasn't great. Cache data, this one also, I was just doing a test for a large bank just recently, and they actually had an incident where, it was just like a year or two ago, where they got raked over the coals by Wall Street Journal, saying that their app was logging like sensitive information, credentials, or session tokens, something like that, in the cache data. And so we were in there doing a pen test and a review for them, and they had remediated that. And so we were looking at it and we're like, okay, cool. So we're looking at the iOS and everything, or the iPad version. They had an iPad version and iPhone version. And on the iPad version, everything was cool. But on the iOS version, because they made a design decision to say, well, we don't want to chew up people's data, so they like started cache. They wanted to cache like images and JavaScript and things like that, so that I wouldn't have to chew up people's data. The problem was the way they implemented it started caching everything. So every request and every response was being cached in a SQLite database on the device, and so user credentials, session tokens, everything was there on the device, account numbers and everything. And so they were very happy that we caught that before they got caught again by the Wall Street Journal. Another one, screenshots. If you've ever done backgrounding of your banking app, you'll notice, or they should be doing this, they should be blanking out the screen. So when you see it in your task list, it's usually they put their logo or they put something black. That's another thing, because the phone's going to be doing screenshots of the app, so it can do that backgrounding. And so that's another thing, those screenshots being stored on the device of sensitive areas of your application. So also, as I mentioned, the application itself can be an attack surface, and several of these, that you would think of in a web application type scenario could also be used in the app scenario. Most of the the iOS and the Android use SQLite as their database backend. And so you can actually get SQL injection on that. I did a test for an open source application, and I got SQL injection like on the login screen. And it wasn't incredibly serious, but it did let me bypass all of their password criteria. So on the login screen, they let you, when you pick your account, you had to have a strong password, but by using a SQL injection, I was able to reset my password to like just the letter A, and then I could just log right in. Because actually it was becoming annoying on the pen test. I had to keep putting in my password, so I was like, all right, well, I'll just bypass this so I can just put in letter A. Cross-site scripting is also still a risk on the mobile application. This especially becomes true when the application is utilizing something called web views. So web views are basically kind of, you can think of it like an iframe in your application, where the application's not doing native calls to go to URLs and get data. It's really just loading like a mini browser inside their application and consuming some web content. And so the risk here is that you can get cross-site scripting, and then they could get things out, but then it gets even worse, is that especially when apps will go and load like third-party web pages, and you can't really trust where the data's coming from. And so if they have JavaScript enabled on the web view, that's a risk. Another risk is that there's something called the JavaScript bridge. And that this is available on all three platforms, Windows, iOS, and Android. And the JavaScript bridge, the function there is to be able to, from your application in the web view, to be able to use JavaScript to actually make native calls on the phone. So accessing the camera, or doing things that you wouldn't normally be able to do in JavaScript. It's a way to do that, and there's a lot of risks around that, of course, as you could probably imagine. Android had a problem a few versions back with the JavaScript bridge that actually lets you get remote code execution on the device, running native. So you could run like native Java code on the device and read any file and do anything you wanted to, bypassing all the sandbox type restrictions. I think there's even a Metasploit payload out there for JavaScript bridge, RCE. So, and lastly, something called method swizzling or hooking in Android. This essentially is hooking the APIs that the application is doing to either, maybe exfiltrate data. A coworker of mine was doing a test on the little handheld devices that they were running at on airlines. So they go through and you buy a drink, they'd scan it. Excuse me. And they were doing, a couple things correctly. They were using a card reader that encrypted at the head. However, he was able to method swizzle the application itself, that whenever they did the scan, it would send him out a copy of the credit card number that as they were scanning it. But that was only, since they were encrypting at the head, the swipes weren't going to come over. It was when they'd have to fall back to keying in your, if the swipe wasn't working for some reason, they had to key in your credit card number, then it would send, that be in memory, unencrypted, and then he could get it to send it out to that. But the method swizzling and hooking, this is essentially how the SSL, the cert pinning is bypassed. This is how jailbreak detection is bypassed. They're just hooking the APIs either for the application or for the system, and they're just, returning true, everything's good, everything's cool, or you can do it to, change the functionality of the application, as my coworker did. And then lastly, source code analysis. When NCC group does pen tests, I almost always have the source code available. We like doing white box application assessments because we're time boxed, and so the more leg up we can have over the bad guys, the better. So we always usually have the source code available unless the client, for some reason, doesn't want us to have it. And so, on this, we're going to be looking for the same things: credentials, encryption keys. How are they doing crypto? Are they doing it correctly? Because most of the time, they don't. Really anything other that's sensitive in the source code than we could find. I think that's how I initially found the SQL injection in the one app. On Android, if you don't have the source code available, then you can actually download the APK. It's just basically a jar file. You can reverse it and get back to the source code and then read through the source code that way. In the most recent versions of Android, they've actually switched to a new, instead of the Dalvik compiler, they've switched to something called Ant, which is Android Runtime. And this becomes a little bit more tricky to do. But, most of the time it decompiles to at least pretty pseudocode readable, better than trying to debug it. If you do have the source code, then Android Studio is the go-to for that. That's the official Android IDE. And on iOS, unfortunately, since the binaries are encrypted, you have to actually do debugging and use GTB to try to step through the application. So traditional reverse engineering. And if you have the source, then Xcode is going to be your method of choice. And, with that, that's actually, I got through that a lot quicker than I thought I would. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
What's an app sandbox?
I'm sorry?
What's an app sandbox?
Yeah, so essentially what it's doing is restricting one application can't read the memory or the files of another application. So it segregates the two applications and creates like a mini file system for just that application or a mini segment of memory. So the application thinks it's the only thing running. So it can't interfere. It couldn't, if you had malware on your device, then it couldn't like read the memory from other applications and steal credit card numbers and things like that, or credentials out of files and that sort of thing. So, any other questions? All right. I've got some resources here, lots of them. I think the slides, I'll probably post them somewhere so you don't have to scribble these as quickly as possible. But most people are familiar with the OWASP Top 10 project for like web. There's a mobile version as well. They also have some good cheat sheets as well on there for testing Android and iOS. I listed a lot of the tools I talked about. I didn't mention SSLIs. That's good for if you want to like analyze the SSL TLS configuration of your web server. It'll tell you, what cipher suites are supported, what SSL versions are supported, if there's, TLS renegotiation, any other flaws and vulnerabilities like that. That was also originally written by ISEC and Burp Suite and a lot of the Android tools as well. For iOS, here's a list of the different iOS options and tools. And then again, just a little bit more about NCC Group. We staff very kind of uniquely. We don't have like set jobs, like, well, we need to fill this many pen testers and this, we're always looking for very talented people. And we just find really talented people and hire them, and try and snatch them up. So if anyone is interested, hit me up after the talk and be happy to talk to you a little bit more about opportunities with NCC Group. We've got a lot of different offices around. And then here again, my contact info if you want to get a hold of me. And with that, that's all she wrote. Thank you very much.